have been wrestling with in our homes, in our hearts, and in our minds. The recent murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Ahmaud Arbery have shaken our conscience in a way that we must admit we haven't felt before. And as a firm, we agree that to not take a deep dive to understand and talk about what's going on is frankly to be complicit and to be part of the problem. So the purpose of today's discussion is to bring awareness to and to acknowledge the issues that have plagued and continue to plague the Black community, and to shine a light on what can be done to support the current movement and to get in the way of the perpetual and intolerable injustices that are afflicted upon people of color. And I want to be clear, we're talking today about overt and systemic racism experienced by Black people at the hands of white people. I'm going to have everyone introduce themselves quickly, but before we do that, I want to acknowledge that none of us on the Arteezy-Zandri team are experts on this topic. And we've consulted a lot with our friend Judie, who's here with us today and who has been beyond generous with us as we feel our way through these really tough issues. And I mention this for two reasons. First, because as part of my research on this topic, and more recently, the popular topic of white fragility, I understand that it can be considered insensitive to ask a Black person or a person of color to explain to me, for example, how they perceive or how they've experienced systemic racism. But second, because I want to start by thanking Judie on behalf of all of us for encouraging us to do this coffee talk and for letting us know that it's okay and it's safe to ask questions, especially as we are trying to uncover and understand why is this still happening. It's okay that we might make mistakes, but this is the process that we must undertake to get out of our own comfort zones. And it's a process that's necessary to actually affect and impart change. So in case you haven't formally met our team, let me start with some very quick introductions. My name is Paige Zandri. I'm joined by my partner, Lauren Arteezy. If you could just give us a quick wave, Lauren. Together we formed Arteezy-Zandri PLLC, which is a boutique divorce litigation and mediation firm based in New York. We're also joined by our wonderful Director of Operations, Julie Kauser. She's going to moderate today's conversation. And of course, our good friend, as I've mentioned, Judie Saunders, who runs her own boutique litigation firm in New York and New Jersey. So Judie, I'm going to just kick it over to you, so you can give everyone your background and introduce yourself, and then we'll have the rest of Lauren and Judie go around as well.
Sure. Thank you, Paige and Lauren and Julie. It really is a pleasure to join you all here today for an opportunity to share, to discuss, and to frankly be uncomfortable, because that's what it's going to take. As you said briefly, I do have a boutique litigation practice in New York and New Jersey. I concentrate in the area of the sexual, psychological, and physical abuse of children and adults. I've been in that area and doing that. Lauren and I share a common thread. I started in that practice area prosecuting. So on the other side, so to speak, prosecuting in crimes against children. And so that is where my heart and my practice values are, in the voiceless, in the unheard. I also do take cases for individuals who have been charged by the government with crimes. So I've lived, seen, and been personally impacted by the baked in and systemic racism. So that's the area that I work in. That's what I do. I also take on several pro bono cases for individuals who are seeking post-conviction relief in Alabama and also New York State.
Thanks, Judie. Go ahead, Lauren.
Hi, everyone. My name is Lauren Arteezy. And as Judie had indicated, she and I both started, well, I started my career as a prosecutor at the Brooklyn District Attorney's Office, where I ended up in the Gang Bureau, prosecuting gang-related crimes. And when I left the Brooklyn DA's office, I started my own practice with another ADA, and we switched over to the other side, where I defended people charged with crimes in all of the boroughs of New York City. So that developed into an interest in family law, and Paige and I started this practice about, what was it, like 8 months ago now, 9 months ago, where, you know, we're representing individuals involved in divorce, a lot of custody family issues. We're in family court a lot. And I have, through my career as a lawyer, had an opportunity to observe the inequities, the injustices, the systemic racism. I may not have always recognized it, but I am now recognizing it. And I am really grateful to be here. I'm really grateful to Judie for joining us and giving us an opportunity to have these uncomfortable conversations, so that we can make the world a better place and help, you know, and help to correct the horrible injustices that have been perpetrated against the Black community in this country by the white community. So thank you all. And Julie, go ahead.
Hi. So I'm Julie Kauser. I am not anywhere nearly as, let's put it this way, I'm not saving the world like these three ladies are. They are doing very good and serious work. I am doing stuff in the background though. My experience has always been as a professional in the workplace, but also within education. And I would say that I had a 4-year stint in being very involved in the New York City public school system. And it was very, very clear during that time, the racial inequities that were happening within education. And it was something that myself and many other volunteers and parents worked very hard to try to help break down the barriers, but such a long way to go. So I am honored to be the moderator for today, and hope that I do this entire conversation justice in throwing the questions out your way. So with that, I am going to get started. Let me just start by saying thank you to all of the attendees. I see that you're all here. We do acknowledge you. We know that you're there. This conversation in general is meant to be about 30 minutes-ish. Sometimes it goes a little longer. Regardless, we have a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen that you should be seeing. If you would like to throw any questions out for us to kind of mull over during the chat, please do so. We will definitely make it a part of the conversation if you want to watch us kind of chat about it. And again, we may not have the answers or know how the best way to respond to it, but if we don't all start doing this work together, we're never going to get there. So please do, you know, participate with the Q&A. So, you know, one of the things that I know we've all seen so many different times in, let's even say, as far as my memory can go back probably into my adulthood, there have been one too many incidences of what's happened, starting with George Floyd. I mean, like George Floyd's. But this time feels very different. And I would love to hear from all three of you about why this feels different. And Paige, just so everybody knows, when I'm looking at my screen, I'm going to kind of go along the screen. So Paige, I'm going to start with you, and then we'll go from there. But I would love to just kind of hear, you know, why does it feel different this time?
Well, I'm going to try to keep my response to a sentence or two, but you know, the George Floyd murder was, what we saw was a continuous 9-minute video in broad daylight of a Black man being murdered by a white police officer. It was a video you couldn't turn away from. And that, as I mentioned before, really shocked the conscience in a way that I had never experienced before. And it really got me to question, you know, how is this happening? And I didn't have an answer to that. And it was not having that answer that it felt different for me this time. It was unacceptable for me to not look deeper into the history and the deeply seated issues that we have to uncover and that we have to now look at. It just made it impossible to seek any quarter, to hide from it in any way, to seek any shadows, to not have to be able to look away from it and to not have to confront it. It has to be confronted. And that was what was different for me this time.
Lauren.
So kind of piggybacking on what Paige said, I mean, the video is one of the most horrendous things I've ever witnessed in my life. You know, and we all saw it from many different angles. We saw every angle. There was no question about what happened to George Floyd. There was no possible justification, not that there ever is, but in this case, there was absolutely no justification. And we saw a continued hesitation from the prosecutor, the top law enforcement agent in that community, to take action and to make an arrest. And we also saw with the medical examiner's report, you know, a potential cover up, you know, a mitigation kind of added to the as a cause of death. You know, it wasn't so straightforward. And I think in this instance, there was no room for the institutions, the governmental institutions in that community to tell us that what we saw in that video wasn't real, and what they investigated or what they uncovered was real. And I think that it was the breaking point where it was like, no, we saw what happened and you have to do your job. And I think for me, that's what it was. You know, it's just, and you had the Ahmaud Arbery murder that had happened in February, where 2 prosecutors declined to prosecute 3 white men who, like, they were a mob of white men who stalked this young man who was jogging in his neighborhood and murdered him. And, you know, the prosecutors declined to prosecute. So I think it's just, people were like, what is happening? We've seen this video. Thank God for this video. We have to start listening and we have to make changes, because it is not acceptable what has been happening and continues to happen. So that for me was what was different. Judie, I don't know if you have anything that you want to add.
Sure. So I'd have to say that the main difference is the acknowledgement and the validation from those that are awakening and awake in the white community. It's the solidarity. I'd have to say that having lived in this skin, in this form, and having been the direct beneficiary of a strong African-American father and mother, and Caribbean African-American on top of that, I've always known of it. So what today is the 2020 George Floyd was the Emmett Till. That's what I grew up with that Jet and Ebony magazine being told to me, that story being told to me. But then dipping back even further than that with the Tulsa riot. So those are things that were always in discussion in the home, in the school, having gone to a historically Black college and university. So those stories, that's the longer answer to say, the only thing that's different this time for, I think, someone like myself or someone in the Black community is the acknowledgement. It's almost as if, get it? Okay, this is what we've been saying, get it?
Oh, you're like, oh, finally the light bulb went off. Hello.
That's the difference.
I want to be the first to admit that, you know, it's hard for me to say that it took this for me to wake up. It's embarrassing. And it's difficult to admit that openly. But I'm hoping that doing that will encourage more people like me to start admitting that, you know, we've not understood.
Sure.
And if I can just very quickly, I think one of the recent conversations that we've had with Judie has kind of connected the dots for me in a way. You know, I had also, you know, learned about a lot of the events that Judie, that you were just mentioning. And, you know, I think historically I knew about all the events that happened, but and we learned about them as historical events, not with the living, breathing impact that they're still continuing to have on the society that we live in today. And I think that's what was missing from my education. And it just took, you know, having these open, uncomfortable conversations, you know, where I turn bright red and I'm worried about saying, you know, about, you know, and I'm worried about, you know, saying the wrong thing or making things worse. And Judie, you know, when we talked about, just those events and the impact those events had on each other and the purpose of those events, and you just kind of enlightened me to this existence of you know, you had talked about psychological warfare and things like that, and I think we're going to get an opportunity to talk about that further, but and you know, really grateful for that, for the opportunity for that conversation. And I agree with Paige. It's embarrassing that it took us this long, but we're here now, and we want to be supportive and do what we can to move things forward, move things right.
So Judie, in a similar vein, but different. So this time feels different, but how has the response been different? I mean, we're already seeing some changes happen, but you know, I know during our previous discussions, we've talked a little bit about the history of the psychological warfare that's gone on. Maybe there could be some background there that you could share, and how some of this response that we're getting now is not what the community, the Black community, has received in the past.
Sure, absolutely. Because I know for a fact that the psychological impact of slavery, of systematic racism, which, let's be clear, is a free-flowing stream that has never stopped running. The tap of racism has never been turned off. It has been a psychological gaslighting. And when you see that 2 weeks, 3 weeks of rioting, when you see, and sorry, not rioting, protesting. I said rioting because I was looking at my notes, protesting. And then when you look at the crowds, DC, England, New York City, and they are filled with white America, I can't tell you the healing impact that has on someone, on a mother, on an attorney, where you see, it's powerful. And I think that's because there is the recognition that, again, it's the recognition that there is something wrong. The tape is unequivocal. We've been locked in at home. We're not about our daily business. We've been forced to sit and be still for a little bit. So these things have come up. But putting it into context and speaking directly to the psychological warfare, or the 2020 term for that, gaslighting. When someone you hear in white America, and sometimes even you might hear someone, an uninformed, you know, a person of color may seem, well, why are they so angry? Why are Black people so angry? Well, why does it still exist? We've given you affirmative action. President Obama was in the White House. You know, Judie, you're a lawyer. You know, you may see a couple of, you know, doctors of color sprinkled here and there. And these things are not, you know, because this has been removed. It's happened in spite of this. You know, just to give a couple of data points, when we talk about, and we use the word rioting, and why are Black people so upset? And I know that it's been discussed in some forums. So you have the unofficial ending of slavery, you know, with the Emancipation Proclamation. And then we all heard or received more information about Juneteenth, so which really came 2 years after the Emancipation Proclamation in Texas. But then the psychological warfare. Now we know it was intense and nonstop all through slavery. So for example, in the New York Times podcast 1619, which talks about these early days of slavery, you'll learn about that. And, you know, I could bring up some actionable tips later on at the end of the discussion, but talk about psychological warfare. When you were on a plantation and you were pregnant, they would actually dig out a hole in the ground for a mother to put her belly in, a slave mother, an African-American brother, to ensure that the whip hit her evenly on her back. And so when we talk about that warfare, that started in the 1600s, continued, and then you think there's an end now with this edict from the government. But then you hear, well, here's another brilliant thing that's coming. The stream's still coming now. Well, why don't we think about Plessy versus Ferguson, separate but equal? So you see that there was this thought out, concerted, and intentional intent to codify. We have to, quote unquote, let them go. But how do we keep it going? We keep it going through Plessy versus Ferguson. We keep it going through the different rioting. Just a couple of riots. When, if you ever hear and you're having conversations around your dinner table with your white, grandfather, grandmother, uncle, they say the word rioting, bring up 1817 in Mississippi, bring up 1873, bring up the New Orleans riots, the Memphis riots, Tulsa. And
I want to comment while you're talking. What I found, because I was looking at an article yesterday on NPR and they were calling them riots. I find it interesting, the terminology of riot versus protests. I mean, you just said the word riot. Why is it even considered a riot? They were protesting for their rights, but we've even...
Well, let me clarify that, because what I'm talking about, let me be very clear. When I was speaking of these, I'm speaking of riots that were actually conducted by white Americans against Black Americans. Okay. So 1873. So we're just coming out. We're coming off the plantations. You're thinking you're going to be free, but then guess what? The same slaveholders now started out on their own form of wholesale terrorism. So that's why I use the word riots. And,
okay, good. That's a good clarification.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah. So the Meridian, Mississippi riot starting in 1817, the Colfax massacre in Louisiana in 1873. And it goes on year after year, 1866, 1876. And that's the beginning, looping back to that psychological warfare. You're not going anywhere. And then you bring us out about 20 years, so into the early 20th century, 1920. Okay, so you had the separate but equal. Jim Crowism is now becoming law. It's embedded in our laws. And then you have members of the Black community saying, that's fine, we will go separate. And what do you have? Then you have the Tulsa massacre with the Black Wall Street. You have Rosewood. You have these specific instances where you can't get away. And it's so insidious. And I'd like to say that, to also offer the point to anyone in white America that really wants to become involved in this, I'd say to them, you have also been in some ways hoodwinked by baked-in racism, because it's as if, unless you're paying attention, and as an African American, you have to pay attention, but you're going along and you're thinking that you're outsourcing the making of your laws, you're outsourcing the writing of your school books to different individuals. And these individuals, they've only had the mic. No one else has had the mic. So you think that, hey, a criminal law is being written on your behalf and on behalf of other individuals, but that's not so. I know, and individuals that have been reading about this and experiencing this, that in particular, they've been written in such a way to perpetuate and to continue discrimination and in slavery and psychological warfare. So it's been an injustice on all sides. Of course, mostly the Black community.
Right. So and that background is very helpful. And there's so many other things I want to unpack in there, because and I think we're going to talk about education in a bit, but I just need to say, when I read about the Tulsa massacre, I'm embarrassed that I never heard of that before. And I spent the first 20 years of my career in financial services.
Yeah.
That should have been in a school book somewhere. That should have been
American planes being used to bomb their own citizens.
That one right there is it took my breath away. Sure. When I read that. Okay. Sure. And for anybody also who, Judie was referencing a number of things in the early 1900s, but even yesterday we shared an article that NPR had on that talks about, even going back 50 years ago, a report, the last major report that was really done on, that would really address serious structural inequities, started in 1968. And if you read this article, which you can find on our Facebook and LinkedIn profiles, if this isn't an example of systemic racism and how it happens and the psychological warfare, I'm not sure. It very succinctly helps kind of encapsulate it. So I would also recommend anybody on the call, if you haven't seen that article on our website yet, please, on our Facebook page, please do so. So let's just talk though for a second, Judie. I want to circle back around to the idea of what are you seeing that's happening that you have been, as a community, been begging for, that's finally happening? What is the difference? And I just, before you say anything, I just want to make sure that the people on the call, I do acknowledge that you have some questions here. We will get to them. I just wanted to acknowledge that, so go ahead.
Okay, so to make sure I understand, so what have I been seeing that's been different in the response by white America?
Yeah, like we're already seeing some changes happening, right? There's a response. So can you talk a little bit about why did it take this? What are they doing that's finally happening that maybe the community has been asking for years?
So I've been seeing in particular, because I'm usually looking in the lens, as an attorney, I've been seeing that there has been some kind of swift action by Governor Cuomo as to a couple of different immediate laws. Some of just before this kind of awakening, there started already to be some reform in New York, in New Jersey as to bail laws, which is a huge, and just briefly for the sake of the audience. So we are a country that prides ourselves on innocent until proven guilty. However, and this is, when I tell you this is a huge problem for the poor and for the Black community, it's to be accused of a crime and then to be held because if there's bail set. So bail meaning money that has to be posted or placed to ensure you are coming back to court. And it could be something anywhere from 500 to, bail to absorbent amounts, 50, 100,000. And if you don't have that money, you could be as innocent, because at that point, it's just allegations. And it's just the government pointing their finger at you, so to speak. And if you don't have that bail, you're going to sit there during the duration of your case, versus if you have the money, you're able to fight your case, while you're released. So that is a huge problem. So I've seen some reform come to that. However, there has been a lot of backpedaling, even in New York, as to the bail reform. So that's kind of some of the things that I've seen. The other immediate response that is hopeful, and what Black America has been calling for, are the pulling down, the removal of these Confederate statutes, slaveholders. I mean, what is more unwelcoming? You are in, and I'm calling America my home. It's the only home I've ever known. What is more unwelcoming? And you're very aware of this as an African-American person, to look up as you're walking to court, as you're walking to the store, as you're having lunch, and to know that that individual enshrined for everyone to see, was a slaveholder, had no regard for your life. I see that to me is a wonderful, positive, immediate sign. This discussion is an immediate and wonderful. It's also allowed, I can only speak for my position. It's also allowed me even to open a sense of myself, things that I normally wouldn't talk about, or, you hear this term called code switch. And that's something that's, it's either spoken about favorably or unfavorably, but you're forced, being a Black person of color, you're forced to live in very different worlds. You speak two very different languages. And as you become more professional, or you're of a different income strat, you code switch even more. And you're forced to do it. I'll tell you just very briefly, when I worked in Washington, D.C. for a national political campaign, and I was mentioning to one of the other individuals colleagues that I worked with, that I was going to a party. That's when I did party even more. I was going to a party at Howard University, and the individual looked at me and said, well, where's that? We're talking about in the nation's capital, the most historic, storied institution in the world, in my opinion, that they weren't aware of that. They weren't aware that, and that to me was beyond insulting. And they actually lived in Washington, D.C. So it's that type of, these conversations itself is also something that I see the immediate good positive effects.
Great. And, you know, back to the idea that the statues are coming down, I mean, that just kind of layers onto the psychological warfare, right? That you were talking about. That's what we're talking about here. When we talk about this psychological warfare, if you had to come across something that every day made you panic, upset, reminded, you wouldn't want it there either. And I think a lot of people don't think of it that way, what that psychologically does. So,
and then when you respond, when you respond passionately, when you respond out of experience, well, why are you so angry? Angry Black woman. No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that I'm talking about something. It's as if you're, you know, a child, and putting in the conference or example of, you know, when I'm speaking to a child that's been sexually or psychologically abused. And can you imagine if I, you know, just didn't, you know, well, why didn't you tell anyone? Why didn't you talk about it? You know, that you're gaslighting them. It's a very real experience to them. So that's the other thing. It's the acknowledgement.
That's great. And so, all right, let's move on to the next question. And Lauren, I'm going to tee this one up to you first, but then Judie, because this has to do both with you having both worked at the DA's office. Given your background and experiences, what can you share about the racial inequities in the justice system that you experienced and saw that disproportionately impacted the Black community?
Oh, we were going to start. I'll go first on this one. So, you know, obviously what Judie was talking about in terms of bail and the, you know, at the DA's office, there was a policy that you requested bail, and the bail was requested based on, you know, really policies more than individual cases. It was about a kind of a CYA, as we call it in the legal field, like, you know, you just had to request it, and then the judge, you know, was going to set what the judge was going to set, and you did have people, and there were inequities in that, and, you know, people were held on bail. It kept them in, you know, what Judie was talking about in terms of innocent until proven guilty. That's one of the founding principles of our justice system, our criminal justice system. And the bail being set just based on, okay, it's a robbery in the first degree, bail needs to be set, bail needs to be requested at this amount. So I would say that, you know, when I was an assistant district attorney, I was participating in that discriminatory policy and the systemic racism. You know, these young Black men were, you know, if they were known to be a family member or an associate of an individual that the NYPD had classified as a gang member, you know, that went into our argument, and, you know, they could have just grown up in the same building as the other individual. So there were all these different types of inequities and injustices, and you'd also see it in the sentencing. And, you know, just as an observer, you would see, depending on what state you're in and you know, what type of family you come from, if you're accused and convicted of the same crime as, you know, a Black person in say New York City versus, I mean, I'm just going to use an example because it makes it easier, Brock Turner. You can see the inequities in the sentencings and you know, the discriminatory practices of the judges. And I observed that, and I saw that. And when I became a defense attorney, you know, I was able to meet with individuals and meet with people and who were accused of crimes and get to know them, and they had families and they were human beings. So I got to see the other side of it, and I got to see how those discriminatory policies and racist policies just impacted these individual families in a way where, you know, you could be accused of a crime and you have to, you know, if it's a conspiracy to commit a felony, which is very serious, and you were a member of a group, you know, and I'm going back to the gang element of it because I have experience in that. You could be charged with this really serious crime with having very little contact, and the DA's office has very little evidence, but the possibility of being convicted, put you in a position where you have to consider pleading guilty. So these are the kinds of things that I was seeing. You know, the conspiracy laws in New York state are very easy to meet the burdens. They're very, as a defense attorney, I despise those types of cases because you could be found guilty of conspiracy, and the sentencing guidelines that the judges, you know, were going to be using to sentence these individuals could be really unfair, and the impact, and it just was so unfair. And so those were things that I saw in the system. And
well, and I think it's important for everybody to know Lauren specifically worked for the gang unit. And so that's where a lot of her experience comes from. So I just want to preface why she mentioned gangs a couple times for anybody who doesn't know. So Paige, you had something you wanted to say.
I just want to bring up a topic and sort of throw it back at Lauren and Judie, which is the parole system. It's something we've talked about, and you guys have both mentioned as, again, the perpetuation of racial injustice. And could you guys just talk a little bit about what that means and what you've seen in terms of how it disproportionately affects Black people, Black men, people of color, and would you consider it a modern form of slavery?
There is nothing, I cannot think of anything in the current criminal justice system that should not be examined, either put into three piles, either totally destroyed, examined and rebuilt, or maybe I just have two categories: totally done away with, or maybe examined, totally done away with, or absolutely destroyed. And that goes from, it starts with the mindset. And again, I think that this is why we are where we are. The mindset, there's only been one voice that's created the criminal justice system, that's set it up, that's perpetuated it, be it in movies, be it in stories, be it in the education, in our public schools and our private schools. And that voice has been carried through the criminal justice system, through the creation of legislation, which then becomes laws. Then it's picked up fluidly in that same stream that I talked about with the over-policing. Why is it that I can sit in my suburban 99.9% white neighborhood and have a beer? Let's just say I'm having an IPA or whatever it is. How come I can do that? Police officers come up all day long, up and down. Now, mind you, I'm not sitting on the porch by myself or with my brother or cousins, but how come that can happen? And if I did the same thing and I was in Bed-Stuy, well, maybe the Bed-Stuy of 20 years ago, maybe not the Bed-Stuy of today, but if I'm sitting it's not going to happen. I'm going to be harassed. And even more so, an African-American male is going to be harassed. It's the over-policing. It's the stop and frisk. When I came into the DA's office in the 90s, it was Mayor Giuliani with the incessant writing of, it was the quality of life fines. It was being taken in, being stopped, being harassed. That again speaks to that warfare. You are a 13, 14, 11-year-old child, and you know that pretty soon you get tired of being bullied by the police. And God forbid you turn around to this officer and you say, just leave me alone, or you run. Well, I think Trevor Noah said it best. They're bullies. Not all police officers, but they are bullies. So you turn around, you try to defend yourself, or you try to even ask a question, you're being arrested for resisting arrest. That's an A misdemeanor. So now you get swept up into the criminal justice system. So let's just follow that case. So now you're being brought in. Say there's bail set. Well, you're economically disadvantaged. So your mother or your father, they can't come up with the $500, which to them might as well be $5 million. So now you're sitting in jail. And the prosecutor via your attorney says to you, look, you just plead guilty to the reduced charge, to the B misdemeanor, and it'll all go away. Well, you've been sitting there now, maybe you had a little summer job. Well, that's gone. You've been sitting there now 1 month, 2 months. You're terrified. You're in Rikers. You just say, you know what, forget it. I'm just going to plead guilty. Well, what does that do? Well, now you have a criminal record. And then the next time, and now you have a contact with that police officer. So now they know to kind of egg you because their ego's already upset. They're upset with you, and it perpetuates it. So then you go through, now you can't find a job. You've been labeled with a criminal record. You have that warfare going on against you. And then guess what? There may be, because of over policing, you're at the wrong place at the wrong time, and you're swept up to something, that Lauren would have gotten involved in gangs. And so now you're looking at a felony charge. So let's say now you plead guilty because there's a very real, what we call the trial penalty. And it's, if you go to trial, you're going to be facing, so many years in jail, versus if you just take a plea, we'll give you, 3 years, and we'll give you a split sentence, and we'll put you on probation or parole. This to me is the perfection of slavery. It has been perfected and legislated. So now you do your 6 months or you do your year or whatever, and now you're out on some type of probation or parole. I have sometimes counseled clients to, if it warranted, and if I looked at all the options, whatever we have to do to not get involved with parole or probations. It is a horrifically brilliant way to continue to keep African Americans under the thumb of corruption. But I'll just put it right out there. So you have a technical violation, you're called in on a parole, maybe you didn't call in, maybe you moved, or maybe they can't find you. So that just keeps the cycle going. So that's how I see, just taking a sample of a case through the system.
That sample of the case through the system is excellent. I am embarrassed to say that I'm going to get up for a second to get my charger, because guys, everybody's watching, I'm the technical person and something's eaten up all my batteries. So I apologize. Sure. Lauren, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I wanted to say, Judie, that has been also my experience. And Paige and I had some conversations after we spoke last Thursday, where we were talking about, where I counseled clients that it would be better to work out maybe a longer sentence versus taking a parole or probation, because if you are found to have violated, or if you get caught up, or if you're in your building and you are with somebody who you're not supposed to be with, or, you could end up spending a lot more time in prison based on a violation. And I completely agree with you. And I've been out of the criminal field for a while now. And what you were talking about going to trial versus taking a plea, people don't understand that it's not always so difficult to get a conviction based on, I think, a lot of the implicit bias out there, which I think is a symptom of, systemic racism, the psychological warfare, and our lack of education on what our history actually is and what our history means. And it's really unfortunate and unfair. And I really didn't like, it was really hard for me, when I was a defense attorney to talk to and it was mostly young, Black or Hispanic men that I was counseling. And I remember one of a particular client of mine told me, I think you have good arguments and you could win. And I said, I would do everything I can to advocate you to take this to trial, to get you, acquitted, but it's a conspiracy case. And if they find you guilty, the minimum, it was a 25 to life and for a conspiracy. And I mean, there were other, and it was such a hard thing for me. So, and I'm not the person in that position. I can't even imagine how hard that was for for my client, for his family, for his, and he had a son, and it just, and I now I'm thinking about that, and it's hard for me, like Paige said, to not have woken up sooner to what has been going on in this country for ever since the country was founded. And
we've contorted ourselves as attorneys, and this is an awakening for all. We've contorted ourselves to even counsel you know, to know that this is the system, this is the entree of what we have to offer them based on this just twisted, corrupt, it's absolutely sickening.
Yeah.
So guys, I just want to note the time because I know we have a couple other things that we want to cover, but I also want to make sure we get the Q&A. So I think it's important for us to make sure we talk about the actionable items that we can do. I know that we also wanted to talk about what the definition of defunding the police means. Paige and Lauren, I'm going to make a suggestion, which I think might be able to help, because that, although that's important, the questions that we have here are important and the actions are important. I think we may want to actually use our social media platform to define what that means and how, just so that everybody understands what that, does that work for you?
Yeah, I had sort of, I had pivoted a little bit because I thought the parole question was also quite valid. And I think that's a great solution. We'll just address the defunding, how to define defunding. Yeah,
because I think that's an important thing. But let's quickly talk about the questions that I have here, and then let's talk about actions. So someone's asked, when I grew up in Detroit in the 60s, it was called the race riots, then later the riots, and now the insurrection. Is that due to white fragility? And Paige, I know you recently started reading White Fragility, but I thoughts?
I will say that I'm probably not qualified to answer that question. My research into white fragility is recent, and it's due to me asking myself whether I, am a person who wilts like a flower in the sun when it comes to confronting these issues. So I can't address the evolution of the terminology of those riots specifically. And maybe Judie or if you have something to impart on that topic, but I can definitely speak to other parts of white fragility.
It has, I think emphatically, it has to do with only one type of individual controlling the conversation. Controlling the conversation, writing the history, that's all it has to do with. So as I was stating earlier in the conversation, riots was a term that was assigned to white Americans who were terrorizing newly freed and then also in the early 1920s and going into the 1960s, those were riots, those were massacres. Rosewood was a massacre. The Dozer Boys facility in Florida, Jacksonville, Florida, that housed many African-American males and just horrible tortures. Those were massacres, those were riots. And I think that when you have that terminology, the KKK, I always find it painfully laughable that they are even given the name, those acronym of KKK. They should be called terrorists, unequivocally wholesale terrorism. The burning, and that is firsthand. I lived in Alabama in the the late 70s. I have seen with my own eyes fully robed Ku Klux Klan. They are terrorists. There's nothing more. So it's that type of terminology when one person is controlling it. So the use of riots to thugs to insurrection to massacre. That's only because one person has had the mic. That's what that is. And it's a way of sugarcoating the violence.
Okay. The next question I have is, I saw the James Baldwin movie, If Beale Street Could Talk, 2018, a year ago. It shocked me to learn this sort of thing still occurs to the extent it does. As depicted by this movie, I grew up in the South in the 1960s, so I do not think I was naive about this sort of thing happening. However, I thought it had gotten better. Obviously, it hasn't. I just hope this latest incident will really make a difference this time. Finally, it is time for a change. However, it will take leadership to make permanent changes. I am not sure this country has the leaders to do what needs to be done. Your thoughts, Judie? This is specific.
No, it is not the leadership.
No. We can all agree here that we are definitely
It has to start with us. It has to start with why. Why? When you are sitting on your beach chair in the Hamptons, on the Jersey Shore, you have to ask, you have to look around. Why are there no Black people here? Why are there no Latinos here? When you are skiing the slopes of Jackson Hole or Beaver Creek, how come there are no Black people on these ski slopes with me? Why? That is what we have in our highs. That's what we've been looking at. We're never numb to the fact that we're the only person in the room. If you're at your next event when we're all able to gather again, and you're, in downtown Manhattan, or you're at Bloomingdale's, or whatever your day may take you, why is there no one of color here? And once you start asking that why and you don't stop, that's when you won't be able to say 5 years from now, oh my God, I can't believe this is still happening. It has never stopped happening. Lauren and I can tell you from dealing with this in the legal, it has never stopped happening. It has always been happening, maybe acutely feeling this as a person of color, but it's never stopped. It has never stopped. Maybe individuals have gotten busier, or you're going about your daily activities, but it has never stopped. It has never let up.
Yeah, and I would agree with you, Judie. Unfortunately, we definitely do not have the leadership that it takes right now. And hopefully one of the messages that the firm has been getting out there a lot, that Lauren pointed out from the very beginning when we started this conversation internally, was how important it is to get out to vote, not just in the national elections, but in your local elections, because the local elections are where people who are either prosecutors, or it depends upon where you live and but at the end of the day, you're voting for people in your local area who can affect change. So
the judgeships are wildly important. You want to find out, are the judges being appointed? You want to find out, these judges can be reviewed. These are having direct impact.
Yeah.
And let me be clear that these laws that are constantly affecting, and rulings and court cases that are constantly affecting the Black community, white community is getting swept up in there too. I have a number of cases where a number of suburban, dads, financial institution, they get swept up. And it's shocking. Those are the things that make the news, but it affects us all. Clearly, it affects the African-American community more intensely, but there's corrections that needs to be made.
Yeah. To the person who asked what social media platform will put the definition of defunding police, it'll be on our Facebook and LinkedIn page. So we'll make sure and post this. We'll also follow up with everybody for links to the recording so you can share it with other people. Okay, let's talk about, we only have a few short minutes, and although I know we could go over, we also don't want to take up, we want people to watch this, right? We want people to watch. And Judie, maybe we'll do another one of these, again soon. There's enough content here, obviously. Okay, let's talk about the future. What can we do? What do you think you're going to do? And Lauren, you look like you've got something.
Like that.
You look like you're ready. Yeah. What can we do to?
I don't want to interrupt, but I am an interrupter. So
I have to say, Lauren, you must have something tying your hands and feet down, because you've been particularly patient. And I know that I've seen you a couple of times make a comment. So please, I'm dying to hear from you.
So yeah, no, and I get yelled at by judges all the time for interrupting them. Judie was just talking about something, in terms of paying attention to where you are and who is there with you. And that is something that changed for me when I moved to New York City. And prior to that, I didn't have, Black friends. I didn't have very many friends that were, people of color. So I didn't notice that, who was there and who wasn't there. And then I started to notice that because, I had people in my life who, pointed it out to me. And I made a conscious effort to know where I was, to know what types of communities in New York City, discriminate against people of color, and to be aware of that. And I think that had changed my perspective on what, like, discrimination, and it opened my eyes, and, you know, and I needed my eyes opened even more. I realized that recently, and I've been trying my best to do that. But one of the things that, Judie, you talked about with us that I just really loved was the daily changes that in your life that it takes to change your perspective. And, you know, in terms of this conversation, we're talking about perspective in terms of racism, and it was just beautiful. So I want you to explain it, because I don't want to, you know, take away. It's just going to be so much more beautiful the way that you explained it to us. And I think that is piggybacking on this idea that you have to pay attention to who's around you and where you are, and companies and organizations that are exclusive and don't offer, you know, acceptance to you know, to every American, regardless of their skin color. And that will open a lot of people's eyes. But also, yeah, Judie, if you could talk about
Sure.
You know.
So we're talking about actionable, real steps. You know, it's not going to be the current leadership, the current administration, and it shouldn't be put on any one leader. So what do I say to someone? How can I really make a difference? How can we capitalize on this momentum? It has got to be a lifestyle change. You have got to commit to 5 minutes a day of, I don't care what it is, however you can get it in, be it a podcast. And I have a number of different podcasts, 1619, Journey to Launch. I could give this to Julie so that she can post. It's reading something for 5 minutes. Sean Rochester put out a brilliant book called The Black Tax. You know, the cost of being Black, the cost of what being cut out of intentionally with the housing laws, with the cut out of the GI Bill in the early 1950s, 1940s, specifically being cut out of those things, and how the generational wealth and how that racism, you've got to take 5 minutes a day to learn about that, so that you won't be so incensed when you see, when you can't understand, why is it like this? Well, it was like this by design. Take 5 minutes a day to learn about what exactly is redlining. When we speak of, you know, in the context of voting, or even neighborhoods, the way urban neighborhoods where you might have African Americans, the way they were deliberately cut off because of transportation and city planning. That helps you understand. So it's got to be a lifestyle. When I decided to start running marathons, I didn't go from the couch to 26 miles. It was 5 miles, 10 miles. It was the long runs. It has to be a lifestyle change. So if I was going on my long run, then I couldn't down a bottle of wine, because I knew I had to get up. It was a lifestyle. It was incorporated into what I did. I think that's what, if you're committed to this, white America, it is a lifestyle change. It isn't going to be, this is horrible, this is awful, I can't believe I watched this man die. So that's one actionable step that I would say that has to be done. It has to become a lifestyle. I have more. The other one that comes top to mind, it is the tenderness replacement. I call it the substitution practice. Whenever you see, be it a movie, be it the next news report, or whatever you see, be it the next quote unquote, there's a thing in law enforcement called the perp walk. And it's done where for specifically to prove a point, you'll take a person that's been accused, they've been arrested, and the police will know where the cameras are, and they will parade the accused in front of the cameras. This is done routinely to African American males. So in the minds of white America, I see why white America thinks you're criminal. Black people are criminally minded. They're always in trouble. It is things like the perp walk. It's things like the different movies. It's the picture of the welfare mom. But spending time in the 5 minutes a day, you'll understand why these things are happening. And also using the substitute theory. So what is that? It's whenever you see that happening, think of the person that you think with most love and tenderness to, be it your child, be it your partner, be it your parent, and put them in that. Like, how would that feel if I saw my father's hands behind his back? Because I'm telling you, in Black America, that's what I do. When I see someone being paraded on a perp walk, when I see, you know, a child, or when I see it anywhere. I mean, I was Ahmaud Arbery. I mean, I saw my 15-year-old who jogs. When I see that, I can't even, that wrecks you. And it loops back to that psychological warfare. When you see that, you're being wrecked every day over and over again. So it's substituting. So the 5 minutes a day, it's substituting an individual that you love and that you know is so tender, substituting and putting them in the shoes of whomever that Black person that's being exploited.
Go, Paige.
I want to add, I was raised in a household where we did not talk about tough issues, anywhere from race to politics to religion to money, even inside our own family's household finances. We just did not talk about those things. And on the back of what Judie's saying about lifestyle change, I would just encourage families in their homes to, if that is the culture inside anyone's home who's listening, and I'm making this adjustment with my family, we have to start talking about these things in the safety of our homes, especially because that is where we learn how to talk about things outside of our homes, and talk about the tough issues in a safe place. And the other thing is to continue to ask why. So on the topic of white fragility, you know, what I've learned is you can have a reaction to witnessing or even being a part of racial injustice, and you might suffer from white fragility if your reaction is to be angry at being accused of being racist, if your reaction is to feel guilty, or if your reaction is to feel sad. I have certainly felt really sad and guilty for not understanding. And so the best thing that I've learned you can do is start to ask yourself, why am I feeling that way? Especially if I'm feeling angry about it. You have to start uncovering on your own conscious and your own psyche. Ask yourself why is that my reaction? And then when you start to, in the external world, understand or hear about things that are going on that you might not have understood before, ask yourself why. Ask the person you're talking to, why do you feel that way? In a way that is authentically curious. This is not a debate. Please help me understand. We can't be afraid to ask anymore. And so that's what I would say is a tool. We have a ton of resources we can share in terms of books you can read, organizations you can get behind and support either actively or financially, podcasts you can listen to. So we're happy to share those resources. But you know, I think there's sort of a common thread here, which is it starts within.
Yeah. One of the things, Judie, I really liked during our pre-call that you talked about was being nosy.
Yeah.
That you have to be nosy to find out where the disparities and discrepancies are within your sphere. And that sphere may be your professional sphere, your friend's sphere, it doesn't matter, but ask, you know, I loved that idea of being nosy. Ask the questions, find out. When you hear that something doesn't seem equal or right, dig in more. Yeah. Why? Back to Pay, what you just said, why? And exactly. So
don't give up until you are set. I think we owe it to George Floyd, we owe it to Breonna Taylor, and the list can go on. We owe it to them. You owe it to yourself, because here's the beautiful thing about systemic racism. It's a scalable model, and it will keep scaling. And it's been replicated when it has been applied. That model, the pattern of the corruption, the abuse has been applied to women. It's been applied to the sexual abuse of children. You know, some of the bigger, you know, headline catching, you know, the Catholic Church with the secrecy, the covering up. So it's applied to other areas. So if we don't use this opportunity to ask why in this sphere, it will just keep scaling and replicating and growing. The cancer will keep growing. Be nosy. Who is missing from this table, the proverbial table? be it your dinner table, be it if you're looking around with all of your friends, if you're dropping your kids off at, when we did, you know, dropping your kids off at summer camp, you know, why is my camp so, how come there's no one else at my kids' camp? You know, why is that? Or my kids have brought home their, still to 2020, my kids' school books, their history books. I mean, I can't even believe how they read. They'll have one obligatory 2 pages about the horrors of slavery, which in the mind of most children are like, oh, well, that's all good Black people are good for. They were slaves. And then it just glosses over. So if you're a parent, ask why. Why doesn't it talk about that? You've got to just get curious and be nosy.
Yeah. Well, I feel like there's obviously so much more to talk about here. Paige and Lauren have been sending to me various things to post to our website, which we have been doing and we will continue to do. Judie, anything that you talked about that you can share with me that we can also share with our audience as references, that would be fantastic. And, you know, Judie, I want to personally thank you too for allowing us to have such a candid conversation with you, because like I had told you going into this, I was nervous about saying the wrong thing, which I've also learned I shouldn't be nervous about, not just from you, but that's part of white fragility. So it all makes sense.
We just commit to keeping this conversation going.
Yeah.
Both, you know, at work, at home, and I speak for Lauren and Julie and in thanking Judie. I join you. Yeah. We join you in this effort, and we will keep the conversation going. I don't think there's a better way we could have spent the last hour.
Yeah.
Thank everybody else for joining us, all of the participants. Please, if you have any follow-up questions, don't hesitate to send them to us. We will address them. And if there's any other topic that's related to this that you want us to cover, let us know and we will.
Yeah.
And that's it for now.
Thank you, ladies.
Thank you so much. Thanks.
Take care.
Bye, everybody.